Roman Blackwood didn't rage when he saw the photograph. He went completely still. That was worse. The man who had dismantled 3 rival organizations without raising his voice sat at his mahogany desk at 11:17 on a Tuesday night, holding his phone with both hands like he was afraid it might shatter or like he was afraid he might. The image was simple. A woman pushing a stroller through a Columbus park. Autumn light, red coat, a toddler with dark curls reaching for a falling leaf. The woman was Claire, his Claire. The child had his eyes. Roman set the phone face down on the desk, pressed both palms flat against the wood, and breathed through his nose for a long time. Then he picked it back up and called her number. She answered on the 4th ring. He asked only one question. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and letting them live their own life, this story will reach right through your chest. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like if you're already feeling something, and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, not to Roman's penthouse on Michigan Avenue, not to his offices downtown, where men in expensive suits came and went through reinforced glass doors, and nobody asked too many questions. The letter arrived at the address Claire had listed as her emergency contact at the Columbus General Medical Practice, where she worked, the address of a small apartment on the 2nd floor of a brick building near Schiller Park that she had chosen, specifically because it had nothing to do with Roman Blackwood and never would. She found it in her mailbox at 6:40 in the evening, still in her white coat, Maisie balanced on one hip and a grocery bag cutting into the other arm. The envelope was plain, no return address. Just her name and handwriting. She didn't recognize blocky, deliberate, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned to disguise their own. Claire stood at the mailbox for 3 full seconds before she tucked the envelope under her arm and kept moving. Maisie was tired. That came first. Inside, Claire set the grocery bag on the kitchen counter, lowered Maisie into the high chair with a handful of crackers, and stood at the kitchen sink, holding the envelope without opening it. Outside the window, the last of October's light was going gray and thin over the rooftops. She could hear her neighbor's television through the wall. Somewhere down the block, a car was playing music too loud. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, printed on regular paper, not photo stock, and a handwritten note that was 8 sentences long. Claire read it once. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried easily in over 2 years, not since the night she drove out of Chicago with a gas station coffee and a suitcase and a secret that was 11 weeks old and already changing the shape of her body. She had cried herself empty on that drive, somewhere around Gary, Indiana, with the skyline shrinking in her rear-view mirror, and when she arrived in Columbus, she had made a decision without quite putting it into words. She would not spend whatever came next falling apart. Maisie needed a mother who functioned. So she sat on the kitchen floor and read the note again. The photograph was of Roman, not a surveillance image, not something candid. It was a photograph taken at what appeared to be a charity gala, the kind Roman attended 3 or 4 times a year because political adjacency was its own form of armor. He was in a tuxedo, and beside him stood a woman Claire didn't recognize, and they were laughing at something outside the frame. He looked fine. Of course he looked fine. Roman Blackwood had always looked fine. That was part of what made him dangerous, and part of what had made her fall in love with him 11 years ago, when she was a second-year resident at Northwestern Memorial, and he had come in with a laceration on his forearm that he refused to explain, and had spent the entire suturing process asking her questions about herself, instead of answering any of hers. She had thought he was interesting. She had been correct in all the wrong ways. The note was not from Roman. It was from a woman named Sandra, who identified herself only as someone who worked inside Roman's organization for 6 years and had recently left. Sandra wrote that she had no interest in causing trouble. She wrote that she had heard things, over the years, the kind of things that got mentioned once, and then never again, because Roman's people understood which subjects were closed. She wrote that she had always thought it wasn't right what happened. Then she wrote something that made Claire's vision go strange at the edges. Sandra wrote that Roman had never stopped looking. Not consistently, not obsessively, but she had been present, Sandra wrote, on 2 separate occasions over the past 18 months when Roman had quietly asked his people Stobel to see if they could locate Claire Whitmore. Both times they had come back empty. Roman had not pushed. He had accepted it, moved on, but he had asked. Sandra wrote that she thought Claire should know. Then Sandra wrote that she hoped they were both safe, whoever they were, and she had signed her name, and that was the end of the letter. Claire sat on the kitchen floor until Maisie started dropping crackers over the side of the high chair tray and saying, "Uh-oh," with enormous satisfaction at each one. Claire got up, fed her daughter, gave her a bath, read her the same board book about a bear looking for honey 3 times, because Maisie had developed strong opinions about repetition, turned off the light, listened to Maisie's breathing slow and deepen from the doorway. Then Claire went to the kitchen table and sat with a glass of water and Sandra's note and thought about what it meant that Roman had looked. He had looked twice. He had accepted the empty answer both times. That was she didn't have a clean word for it. With the Roman she had left, that didn't fit. The Roman she had left didn't accept empty answers. He pulled threads until walls came down. He paid whatever was necessary. He applied pressure, without flinching, until the problem dissolved. He had looked twice and stopped. She didn't know what to do with that. What she did know was that she had been living for 2 years and 4 months, with a secret that was 20 months old and had dark curls and her mother's stubbornness and a tiny habit of pressing her forehead against the cheek of anyone she loved as a form of greeting. The secret slept in the next room. The secret called Claire Mama with a confidence that suggested she was the entire known universe, which Claire supposed for now she was. Roman didn't know his daughter existed. Claire had told herself, repeatedly and thoroughly, that this was the right choice. She had constructed a careful argument over many sleepless nights that she could still recite without effort. Roman's resources were unlimited. Roman's legal team was the kind of legal team that made judges nervous. Roman's world was violent in ways that didn't always announce themselves, and she had known, with a cold and devastating certainty, that if Roman discovered she was pregnant when she left, he would use every tool available to him to take that child not out of cruelty, but out of something that Roman himself would have called love, and that Claire had come to understand was control wearing love's face. She had protected Maisie. She still believed that. But Sandra's note was sitting on her kitchen table, and in it was the information that Roman had looked and stopped. And Claire was a physician, and therefore someone professionally acquainted with the reality that data points sometimes required you to update your model. She got up and poured the water down the sink and went to bed and stared at the ceiling until her alarm went off at 5:30. She did not update anything yet, but she kept the letter. 3 days later, she was sitting in her car in the hospital parking garage, 40 minutes after the end of her shift, eating a granola bar and answering email on her phone, when she opened Instagram out of pure exhaustion-driven habit and saw a post she had been tagged in. An old friend from medical school. A woman named Priya who lived in Chicago and had never entirely understood why Claire had left so suddenly and had been gracious enough not to push. Priya had posted a throwback photograph from a birthday dinner 4 years ago. Claire and Priya and 2 other women at a restaurant table, laughing. The comments were what they always were. Nostalgia. Heart emojis. People tagging each other. Claire looked at herself in the photograph 34, not yet carrying the particular exhaustion of a mother raising a child alone, still laughing in the easy way of someone who hadn't yet had to think too hard about the future, and she felt the specific loneliness that hits you when you realize how much distance sits between who you were and who you became. She closed Instagram, or she meant to. Instead, she made the mistake of looking at the post again, this time at the people who had liked it. And there, buried between Priya's college friends and a handful of people Claire didn't recognize, was a username she knew immediately, with the same way you know a car that's been following you, even when it changes lanes. R. Blackwood. Her hands went cold. He had liked the photograph. Not commented. not reached out, just seen it, acknowledged it. A single tap that either meant nothing at all or meant everything, depending on who you were and what you knew and how well you understood the particular vocabulary of a man who was not given to accidents. Roman Blackwood did not accidentally like photographs. Claire put her phone face down on the passenger seat and sat in the parking garage for 6 minutes listening to the distant sound of a car alarm somewhere on the street above. Then she picked up her phone and called Priya. "Hey, that photo you posted," Claire said when Priya answered. "Did you tag me by accident or on purpose?" Priya laughed. "On purpose, obviously. Why, you look great in it." "How many people saw it?" A pause. "I don't know. Maybe 200? Claire, what? Did you know Roman liked it?" A longer pause. "I saw that," Priya said carefully. "I didn't know if I should tell you. When did you see it?" "Maybe an hour after I posted it." "Claire, it's fine," Claire said. "It's fine. I'll talk to you later." She hung up and sat in the parking garage for 11 more minutes, which she knew because she counted them. Then she drove home, paid the babysitter, made Maisie's dinner, put her to bed, and sat at the kitchen table with Sandra's letter, and a decision she was not at all ready to make. She had not put a recent photograph of herself or Maisie on any platform. She had been careful, not paranoid, but careful, the way any woman rebuilding after a difficult marriage is careful, the way any person who understands what wealth and influence can accomplish stays careful. Her accounts were private. Her address was unlisted. Her car was registered to the name of the medical practice. But Priya had tagged her in a photograph, and Roman had seen it within an hour, which meant Roman was watching for her name, which meant Sandra's letter was correct. He hadn't stopped. He'd just gotten quieter about it. She didn't call him that night. She called her sister in Portland, who knew the full truth and had been Claire's only anchor for 2 years, and she talked for 40 minutes while pacing the small kitchen until Maisie made a sound in the next room, and Claire stopped and listened. Breath held until the sound resolved into a toddler rolling over and settling back into sleep. "You have to decide," her sister said finally. "Not tonight, but eventually. I know. If he's already seeing photographs." "I know, Rachel. Then eventually isn't very far away." Claire knew that too. She hung up and sat down and looked at the kitchen table and thought about a man she had not spoken to in 2 years and 4 months. She thought about the night she had left, not dramatically, not with a scene, because scenes with Roman never ended well for the other person. She had waited until he was in a meeting that she knew would last 4 hours. She had packed one suitcase. She had taken her medical license documentation, her social security card, her mother's ring, and the prenatal vitamins she had been buying at a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away and hiding inside a box of tampons in the back of the bathroom cabinet. She had left a note, 2 sentences. "I can't do this anymore. Please don't look for me." He had respected it for a while. And then, apparently, twice over 18 months, he had asked quietly and accepted the silence. She tried to imagine what that had cost him. She tried to imagine Roman Blackwood accepting silence from anyone. She couldn't quite get there. What she could get to was this. Maisie was 20 months old. Maisie had her mother's chin and her mother's lungs. The child was startlingly loud for someone her size and dark curls that came from Roman's side of the genetics, which Claire had understood around month 4 of the pregnancy and had spent approximately 1 night grieving and then moved forward because that was what you did. Maisie had never heard her father's name. Maisie had never had a father at all, in any practical sense. And there was a question Claire had been refusing to look at directly for 20 months. The way you don't look directly at something bright until your eyes adjust about whether that was still the right answer. Whether the reasons that had made it right at the beginning still held the same weight now. Whether a man who looked and then stopped was the same as the man she had fled. She didn't have an answer. She had a letter, and a liked photograph, and a daughter asleep in the next room. She went to bed. In the morning, she got up and made Maisie's breakfast and dropped her at the home daycare run by the woman downstairs and drove to work and saw 11 patients and wrote 4 referrals and ate lunch at her desk. And that evening, at 11:17, Roman Blackwood sat at his mahogany desk in Chicago and saw a photograph of a woman in a red coat and a toddler with dark curls reaching for a maple leaf. Claire didn't know that yet. She was giving Maisie a bath. She was laughing at the way Maisie slapped the water with both palms, like she was personally offended by it. Her phone was on the bathroom counter, and when it rang, the screen lit up with a number she had never deleted. She looked at it for 2 full rings. She answered on the 4th. Claire, his voice was the same, lower maybe, controlled in a way that meant he was working at it. Roman. A silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then he said, "I saw a photograph." She didn't say anything. "The little girl," Roman said. He stopped. Started again. "I need you to tell me something." Maisie was looking up at Claire from the bath, with enormous interested eyes, hair wet, a rubber duck in each fist. "Roman, is she mine?" Claire closed her eyes. She had prepared for this moment in an abstract way, the way you prepare for something you believe might happen but cannot fully imagine. She had constructed answers, careful ones, partial ones, ones that would buy her time. She had a lawyer's number saved in her phone for exactly this reason. None of it came out. What came out was the truth, because Maisie was looking at her, and Claire had decided very early on that whatever she was going to teach this child, it was not going to be how to hide. "Yes," she said. The silence on the other end was absolute. Roman didn't breathe loudly. He didn't gasp. He didn't say anything for long enough that she checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed in a way she had only heard once before the night his father died, years ago, and Roman had called her from the hospital parking lot and said 3 words, and then gone completely quiet while she talked to him. "20 old is she?" Another silence. "Her name? Maisie." Something crossed his voice. Something brief and unguarded that he shut down before it fully surfaced. "I want to meet my daughter," he said. Not a demand. Not a threat. Not the full weight of everything Roman Blackwood could bring to bear on a situation when he chose to. Just a sentence, spoken plainly, from a man who sounded, for the first time in 11 years of knowing him, like someone who didn't know what came next. Claire looked at her daughter. Maisie held up a rubber duck. "Mama, duck." "Yeah, baby," Claire said softly. "I see the duck." She pressed the phone back to her ear. "Not yet," she said. "But we'll talk about it." Roman said, okay. She had expected a fight. She had expected the machinery to start moving, lawyers. Pressure, the slow tightening she remembered from the last years of their marriage. The way Roman solved every problem by closing his hand around it. He said okay. She didn't know what to do with that either. She hung up and finished Maisie's bath and got her into pajamas and read the Bear book twice and turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a long time listening to her daughter breathe in the dark. And she went to the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where she'd sat with the letter and then with the photograph and then with her sister's voice, and she sat down without turning the lights on. Outside, Columbus went on being Columbus, the neighbor's television, the music from the street. A city that had nothing to do with Roman Blackwood and everything to do with the life Claire had built around protecting the most important person she had ever loved. She thought about what he had said. "I want to meet my daughter." She thought about the way his voice had sounded when she told him Maisie's name. Sipsn. She thought about all the things she still didn't know, whether the man on the phone was the same as the man she had left built, whether change of that magnitude was even possible for someone built the way Roman was built, whether she was about to make the second worst decision of her life or the first truly right one. She didn't have answers. What she had was a 20-month-old girl who called a rubber duck with full authority, and a father in Chicago who now knew she existed, and a future that was no longer entirely within Claire's control. She put her hands flat on the kitchen table. She breathed. She started to think about what came next. She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and ran through the conversation the way you replay a car accident, not because replaying it changes anything, but because your brain refuses to stop until it has examined every angle, every word, every half second of silence that contained more information than anything spoken out loud. He had said okay. That was the part she kept returning to. Not the shock in his voice when she confirmed it, though that had been real, unmistakable, a crack in something she had believed was solid concrete. Not the way he'd said Maisie's name back to her, quiet and careful, like he was learning the shape of it. Those things she had expected, in some form. She had prepared for emotion. She had not prepared for him to say okay and mean it. The Roman she had married would not have said okay. The Roman she had left would have had a lawyer on the phone within the hour. He would have deployed patience as a weapon, letting her believe she had control, while quietly positioning everything around her until the only available move was the one he had already chosen. She knew that playbook intimately. She had watched him run it, on business partners, on city officials, on men twice his size who came into meetings believing they had leverage and left understanding they had none. He had never run it on her directly. He hadn't needed to. In their marriage, the control had been softer than that. Slower. The kind that doesn't announce itself until you wake up one day and realize you haven't made an unobserved decision in 3 years. But he'd said okay. At 4 in the morning, Claire got up and made tea and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and wrote a list on the back of an envelope. Not a pros and cons list. She was too tired and too honest for that kind of structure. Just words. Things that were true. Maisie exists. Roman knows. Roman asked to meet her. Roman said okay when I said not yet. Sandra's letter said he looked twice and stopped. He liked a photograph and said nothing for weeks. He called when he had confirmation, not before. She looked at the list. Then she wrote one more thing at the bottom, pressing harder than she needed to with the pen. I don't actually know who he is now. She folded the envelope and put it in the drawer under the silverware, where she kept things she wasn't ready to throw away and wasn't ready to deal with. Then she went back to bed and slept 3 hours, and got up when Maisie did. She called her lawyer first. Margaret Yoon had handled Claire's initial separation paperwork and the quiet, undramatic dissolution of the marriage. 18 months ago, Roman had not contested it, which had surprised Margaret considerably, and Claire only somewhat. Margaret was 61 years old, had been practicing family law for 34 years, and had the particular gift of delivering catastrophic information without visible alarm. He knows, Claire said when Margaret picked up. A beat. How? A photograph online. Someone tagged me. He saw it. Did he contact you? Last night. By phone. What did he say? Claire told her. All of it, the question. Her answer. Maisie's name. The request. The okay. Margaret was quiet for a moment. He didn't threaten anything? No mention of legal action, custody, relocations. Nothing. He said he wanted to meet her. I said not yet. He said okay. Another pause, longer this time. Claire, I want to be careful about how I frame this. Roman Blackwood saying okay is not the same as Roman Blackwood accepting the situation. It may simply mean he's choosing not to show his hand yet. I know that. So we need to be proactive. If he decides to pursue custody, his resources. I know what his resources are, Margaret. I was married to him. Then you know what I'm going to tell you next, that I should have told him sooner. Silence. Not as a moral judgment, Margaret said carefully. As a legal reality, the longer the established pattern of sole custody without his knowledge or consent, the more complex this becomes. Courts don't always look favorably on the mother who hid the child, on either parent who withholds access without documented cause. Claire pressed her fingers to her eyes. He runs a criminal organization, Margaret, that has never resulted in a conviction, because he has 12 attorneys and 3 judges who owe him money. Claire Margaret's voice was even. I'm on your side. I will fight for you and for Maisie with everything I have. But I need you to understand the landscape you're operating in. If this goes to a courtroom, it goes to a courtroom in a world where Roman Blackwood has resources you and I cannot fully anticipate. So what do you recommend? I recommend you control what you can control. You decide the terms of first contact. You set the conditions. You document everything from this point forward, every communication, every request, every response. And you do not let him inside that apartment until you are ready and until I have reviewed whatever arrangement you're considering. He hasn't asked to come to the apartment. He will. Claire sat with that. Set a meeting, Margaret said. Public place. Your city, not his. You bring nothing in writing. You record nothing without consent, and you call me immediately after. Can you do that? Yes, good. And Claire, for whatever it's worth, the fact that he said okay is something. I've dealt with men like him before. Okay is not nothing. Claire hung up and sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for the second time in a week, eating nothing, staring at the concrete pillar in front of her, thinking about a meeting she hadn't agreed to yet. Roman called again on Thursday. She let it go to voicemail. Listened to it twice, standing in the break room with the door closed, her back against the wall, her stethoscope still around her neck. His voice on the voicemail was careful, neutral in a way that cost him something. She could hear the effort in it, the deliberate absence of pressure. I'm not going to push. I meant that. But I'd like to talk when you're ready. About logistics, about what makes sense. I'm not going to make this a fight, Claire. I just want to understand what she's like. He stopped there. Then, quieter, 20 months. I've missed 20 months. He didn't say it as an accusation. That was the thing that made her close her eyes and stand in the break room for an extra 30 seconds before she had to go back out. He said it like someone reading a number they were still trying to comprehend. She didn't call back that day, or Friday. She needed the weekend with Maisie, just the two of them. No phones. The leaf pile in the park down the street. Maisie's outrage at the geese who wouldn't come close enough to be grabbed. She needed to exist in her actual life before she let that life intersect with anything else. Saturday afternoon, Maisie asleep in the stroller, and the park going gold and quiet around them. Claire sat on a bench and called Roman back. He picked up on the first ring. Of course he did. I'll set up a meeting, she said, without preamble. Public place here in Columbus. Just you. No security, no lawyers present, nobody standing 20 feet away pretending to read a newspaper. If I see anyone who looks like one of your people, I leave. Understood. I'm bringing Maisie. A silence. Then okay. This is not a reconciliation. This is not me changing my mind about anything. This is you meeting your daughter one time, in a park, for however long Maisie tolerates it. And then we talk about what comes next. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Roman. I understand, Claire. I'm not coming to Chicago, you. I'm coming to meet Maisie. She hated that he knew exactly what she meant by Chicago, you. She hated that, after 2 years and 4 months, he still knew her vocabulary. Next Saturday, she said. 10 in the morning, Goodale Park. There's a bench near the fountain on the north side. Be there at 10, not before. I'll be there. She hung up and pushed the stroller home in the afternoon light and didn't let herself think too hard about what she had just agreed to. Because if she thought too hard about it, she would find 17 reasons to cancel, and Maisie deserved better than 17 reasons. She told her sister that night. Rachel was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. Rachel, who had driven to Columbus twice in the first year when things were very hard, who had sat on Claire's bathroom floor with her at 3 in the morning when the loneliness and the exhaustion combined into something enormous and suffocating. Rachel, who had never once said I told you so about Roman, which had taken considerable restraint. You're sure? Rachel said finally. No, but I'm doing it anyway. What if he tries to... Margaret's briefed. Everything is documented. If he makes one move that isn't exactly what he said it would be, I have options. Claire, this isn't a legal risk I'm asking about. Claire sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. In the next room, Maisie was making the small sounds she made in deep sleep occasional, soft, like a comment addressed to no one. I know, Claire said. You still love him, Rachel's. You don't have to say it. I'm not judging you. But I know you, and I know what your voice sounds like when you're protecting yourself from something, and right now you sound like someone who put on a lot of armor very fast. Claire didn't say anything. Just be careful, Rachel said. With Maisie, and with yourself. That's all I've ever been. I know. I'm just asking you to stay that way. The week moved slowly and then all at once. Wednesday was bad. A patient she had been treating for 8 months took a turn that she hadn't anticipated, and she spent 3 hours in a consult that went nowhere useful. And by the time she got Maisie from daycare, she was hollow in the way that only medicine at its worst could make her. She sat on the floor of the living room while Maisie methodically removed every book from the bottom shelf and handed them to her, one by one, and Claire accepted each one and set it in a pile and didn't say a word. And Maisie seemed to understand, the way toddlers sometimes inexplicably do, that right now her job was just to keep handing things over. Thursday, she woke up at 5 and lay in bed thinking about Saturday with a specificity that bordered on obsessive, where she would stand, where Maisie would be, what angle kept the most distance. She thought about what Roman's face would look like when he saw Maisie for the first time. She had been refusing to think about that, but Thursday morning it came through anyway, and she lay there in the gray early light and felt something that she could not name cleanly, a feeling with too many components to reduce. Friday, she almost called it off. She was standing at the kitchen counter at 8 in the evening, Maisie already down, the apartment very quiet, and she had her phone in her hand and Roman's number on the screen, and her thumb was genuinely close. She thought about what she was actually afraid of. Not Roman making a scene, not him bringing lawyers, not some elaborate play she hadn't anticipated. She was afraid of him being different. Because if he was different, really different, changed in the way that Sandra's letter and the okay and the voicemail and the absence of pressure all pointed toward, then the story Claire had been telling herself for 2 years was more complicated than she'd allowed it to be. It didn't make leaving wrong. She had been right to leave. She was certain of that. But if he was different, then the calculus about Maisie shifted, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that shift. She put the phone down without calling. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. Saturday was cold and clear, the sky a pale November blue, the kind that looks warmer than it is. Claire dressed Maisie in her red wool coat. Maisie had strong feelings about the red coat and would not wear the practical navy one without a negotiation that neither of them had time for, and put her in the stroller and walked to Goodale Park. 17 minutes early because she needed to see the bench before he got there. She needed to own the space before he arrived. She sat on the bench at 9:51. She angled the stroller so that Maisie could see the path, but Claire could see the path's entrance from the parking area. She waited. At 10:03 she saw him. He was alone. She had not entirely believed he would be alone, despite what he'd promised, because Roman Blackwood, alone in an unfamiliar space, was not something she had much experience with. But he was alone. No earpiece, no coat that moved wrong, no man 20 feet behind him, pretending to be interested in the trees. Just Roman. He was in dark jeans and a heavy gray coat. No tie. That alone was information. Roman in casual clothes was Roman signaling something, because he understood exactly what his appearance communicated, and he chose accordingly, always. He looked older. Not badly, he was 43, and had always carried age well, the kind of man who would look compelling at 60. But there was something different in the way he moved. Something moved. Something less like a person crossing a room he owned, and more like someone approaching something he wasn't sure how to handle. He saw her from 30 feet away. He slowed. Then Maisie, who had been watching a pigeon with tremendous focus, turned and noticed the approaching stranger with the quick animal attention of a toddler encountering novel input. Roman stopped completely. He stood there, on the path, 10 feet from the bench, and looked at his daughter for the first time. Maisie looked back at him with the frank, undefended assessment of someone who had not yet learned to pretend. Then she climbed down from the stroller with the particular determination of a 20-month-old who has decided something, crossed the short distance of cold grass, and held up a maple leaf she had been carrying in her fist for the last 4 blocks. Roman stared at her. He was, and Claire would not have predicted this, not this, specifically completely still. Not in the controlled, deliberate way he was still when he was deciding something. Way of someone whose entire system had simply stopped processing because the thing in front of them was too large for the usual channels. Maisie thrust the leaf upward. "Here," she said, with enormous authority. Roman looked at Claire. Claire gave him nothing. She couldn't. She was holding herself very carefully together, and the look on his face was not helping. He looked back at Maisie. He crouched down. Not gracefully Roman at 43 with creaking knees, lowering himself to toddler level on damp grass, which was not something she had ever imagined, and which was so specifically ordinary that it hit her somewhere she hadn't protected. He took the leaf. "Thank you," he said. Maisie examined him with complete seriousness. Then she appeared to reach some internal conclusion because she stepped forward and pressed her forehead briefly against his cheek, her greeting. The thing she did with people, she decided before stepping back and looking at him again to see what he would do. Roman didn't move for a full 3 seconds. When he finally looked up at Claire, his face had done something she had not seen it do in all the years she had known him. She looked away. She stared at the fountain. She heard him say something to Maisie, very low, and heard Maisie say something back that was mostly nonsense syllables with one clear word in the middle, duck. Not because Maisie felt strongly that ducks were relevant to most conversations, and she heard Roman make a sound that was almost a laugh but came out wrong, broken at the edges. She stared at the fountain and breathed through her nose and told herself this was going to be fine. She almost believed it. They sat on the bench for an hour and 40 minutes. Maisie spent approximately 20 of those minutes engaged with Roman directly, and the rest of the time conducting her own business, investigating the fountain edge, attempting to collect every fallen leaf within a 30-foot radius, making her opinions known about the geese, while Claire and Roman sat at a careful distance and talked. Or tried to. The first 10 minutes were logistics. Careful, lawyer-adjacent language about what this visit was and wasn't, about what Claire's conditions were going forward, about the fact that Margaret Yoon existed and was involved. Roman listened. He didn't argue any of it. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both reasonable. That was when Claire started to feel the ground shift slightly under her, which she did not welcome. "I want to understand what you need," Roman said. "Not what I want. What you need for this to work." She looked at him. "Don't do that." "Do what?" The reasonable voice. The "I'm listening" posture. I know what that looks like when it's a tactic. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Something more complicated. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." He looked out at Maisie, who was crouched near the fountain, intensely inspecting a wet leaf with the focus of a scientist. "I don't know how to do this differently than I know how to do it," Roman said. "I'm aware of that. I was sitting in my car for 20 minutes before I came in here trying to figure out how to walk up to you and not have every muscle in my body trying to take control of the situation. Did you manage it? I'm on a bench asking you questions instead of making statements. For me, that's significant." She almost smiled. She shut it down. "Roman, my daughter, our daughter." The correction landed between them like something dropped. Claire felt her jaw tighten. "My daughter has been raised for 20 months without you. She doesn't know you. She doesn't know what you do or what your world is. And I need you to be honest with me right now about something. Ask. If I allow you access to Maisie, real access, regular, ongoing, what does that look like from your side? Because what it cannot look like is your organization anywhere near her. It cannot look like men I don't know knowing where she lives. It cannot look like resources being used to establish any kind of a position. Claire, let me finish." Her voice stayed level. "That cost her something. I left because I knew what you were capable of. Not violent things. The other kind. The kind where you're so sure you know best that you build a perfect structure around someone and call it love and don't notice that the person inside it can't breathe. I cannot let Maisie grow up inside that structure. And if you cannot honestly tell me that you have changed in the way that would make that impossible, then I need to know right now, before this goes any further." Roman was quiet. Maisie had moved to a nearby bench and was attempting to climb it with a focus that suggested she viewed it as a personal challenge. "I can't prove it to you in a park," Roman said finally. "I know that. I'm not going to try. But I'm asking you for the chance to prove it over time, because there's no other way to do it." He looked at her directly. "Right that I built structures. You're right about why you left. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it wasn't what it was. Good. But I'm also telling you I've had 2 years to think about it, and I understand things now that I didn't when you were in it with me. Not because I had some revelation. Because you left. And it was the first time in my life that something I did cost me everything I actually wanted. And that has a way of making a person think. Claire looked at him for a long moment. She's going to fall, Claire said. Roman turned. Maisie had achieved the bench summit and was now standing on it with tremendous satisfaction, arms out for balance. Roman was on his feet before Claire was. He crossed the grass in 4 steps, and when Maisie wobbled on the edge of the bench and her expression shifted from triumph to alarm, Roman's hands were already there, not grabbing, not lifting, just present, a brace on each side of her small frame. Maisie grabbed his fingers for balance, looked up at him. Up, she informed him. Roman looked at the word like it had hit him in the chest. He looked back at Claire. Claire walked over slowly. You can pick her up, she said, if she's asking. He lifted Maisie. She immediately grabbed a fistful of his coat collar and leaned back to examine his face from close range with complete concentration, the way she examined everything she found interesting. Then she pressed her forehead against his jaw again, the greeting she gave people she'd decided to keep. Roman closed his eyes. Just for a second. 1 second where all of it, the control and the calculation and the carefully maintained surface was completely gone. Claire watched it happen. She wanted to look away again and she didn't. A sound like green wood splitting. When Maisie started squirming to be put down, she spotted a pigeon of interest. Roman set her down gently and watched her charge across the grass with a kind of naked attention that Claire recognized from somewhere deep in her memory. That was how he used to look at her, before it went wrong. Before the cage door closed, so slowly she hadn't noticed until she was already inside. Roman, she said. I know, he said, before she could find the rest of it. They stood side by side, watching Maisie terrorize the pigeon. The moment was quiet and complicated, and full of things neither of them knew how to say yet, and under the quiet was the fact that everything had already changed, irreversibly, in the last 2 hours. And the only question left was what they were going to do about it. The meeting ended without resolution. That was the truth of it, and both of them knew it. Roman walked them to the park exit. He crouched down one more time and looked at Maisie at eye level, and Maisie regarded him with her characteristic seriousness. Bye, she said. Bye, Roman said. He stood up and looked at Claire, and there was nothing tactical in his face, which was the most disorienting thing that had happened in 2 hours of disorienting things. I'll call when I'm back in Chicago, he said. Not before. When you're ready to talk next steps. Okay, he started to go. Roman. He stopped. She didn't know why she said his name. She hadn't planned to. She hadn't had something ready to follow it with. She likes eggs scrambled, Claire said finally. Soft, not dry. And the left duck. There are 2 rubber ducks, and she only accepts the left one. Just if you're going to be around her, those things matter. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a word for. Thank you, he said. He left. Claire stood at the park exit and watched him go until she couldn't see him anymore. And then she looked down at Maisie, who had transferred the maple leaf to her other hand and was ready, clearly, to go home. Okay, Bug, Claire said. Let's go. She started walking. She was 3 blocks from home when her phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from a number she didn't recognize. 8 words, no introduction, no name. He filed for emergency custody this morning before the meeting. Claire stopped walking. The cold air sat on her face. She read it again. Her hands were not quite steady when she called Margaret. Margaret answered on the 2nd ring. I know, Margaret said. I was going to call you an hour ago, but I wanted to verify before I alarmed you. The filing is real. Emergency custody petition, submitted at 8:47 this morning. Before the meeting. Before he sat on that bench and said, I'm not going to make this a fight. Before he held Maisie on the park bench with his eyes closed. Before he said thank you like it meant something. He had filed at 8:47 in the morning. He had been in the parking lot for 20 minutes, telling himself not to take control. And before he drove into that parking lot, he had already moved to take control. Claire, Margaret said. Are you there? The street was very quiet. Maisie was looking up at her, holding the maple leaf, waiting. I'm here, Claire said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That was training. That was 2 years of building the kind of person who doesn't collapse in the street. What do I do? She asked. You come to my office Monday morning, Margaret said. First thing, and we fight. Claire looked down at Maisie. Maisie held the leaf up toward her. Mama, she said. Leaf. Yeah, baby, Claire said quietly. I see it. She picked Maisie up, left stroller on the sidewalk for just 1 second while she held her daughter with both arms and breathed against the top of her head. And then she put her back down and started walking again. Faster now, toward the apartment that was hers, the life she had built, and a fight she had always known was coming, but had, for 1 hour and 40 minutes in a park, was almost believed she wouldn't have to have. Margaret's office smelled like old coffee and paper, and the particular kind of calm that people who deal with emergencies professionally learn to manufacture. Claire sat across the desk on Monday morning with her coat still on because she hadn't thought to take it off, and Margaret set a printed copy of the custody filing between them and let Claire read it without interruption. Took Claire 4 minutes to read 12 pages. When she looked up, her face was doing the thing it did when she was working, the flat, focused expression that meant every non-essential system had been suspended. He listed Columbus as an unstable environment, Claire said. Yes. He listed my work hours as a factor in Maisie's care. Yes. He has documentation of my schedule, shift records. She set the papers down. How does he have my shift records? Margaret folded her hands on the desk. That's the question I've been sitting with since Friday. Claire looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back down. He had someone inside the hospital, possibly, or someone with access to the practice's scheduling software. The filing references specific dates and hours with a precision that suggests a source, not surveillance. How long? Based on the dates cited, at minimum 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The park meeting had been Saturday. He had called her 2 weeks before that, which meant someone had been collecting information on Claire's professional life before Roman ever made contact. Before the phone call, before the okay. The okay had been a performance. She sat with that. He planned this before he called me. Her voice was very even. The phone call wasn't an emotional reaction to seeing the photograph. It was step 2 of something that was already in motion. Margaret didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't have to. The emergency designation, Claire said. What's his argument for emergency? That Maisie has been kept from a biological parent without legal justification for the entirety of her life. He's framing it as ongoing harm. His attorneys will argue that every day the situation continues is another day of harm to Maisie's development and her right to a relationship with her father. That's not an emergency. That's a custody dispute. It is a custody dispute. But emergency petitions in Ohio Family Court require only a threshold showing, and Roman's team has submitted enough to clear it. The hearing is Thursday. Thursday I've requested a continuance. I'm not optimistic about getting one, given the judge assigned. Claire looked at the filing again, at the careful, lawyered language that turned 2 years of survival into a narrative of deprivation. That took every choice she had made out of genuine fear and reframed it as calculated interference. He sat on a bench with her, Claire said quietly. He held her. He looked at me and said he wasn't going to make this a fight. I know, and he filed at 8:47 that morning. I know. Claire picked up the filing and set it back down. Who sent me the text? The 8 words. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I don't know, do you? No, but someone inside his operation knew enough to warn me. That person may have done you the most valuable favor of your life, Margaret said, because you had the weekend to process it before you walked into this room instead of walking in cold. Claire nodded slowly. Thursday, she said. What do I need to do between now and Thursday? Margaret reached for a yellow notepad. They worked for 2 hours. Claire did not call Roman. She wanted to. Not in the way of someone who wanted to reconcile something, but in the way of someone who wanted to stand in front of the person who had just done a specific thing and make them explain it out loud, in plain language, without the lawyers between them. She wanted to hear him say it. She drove home from Margaret's office and picked Maisie up from the downstairs neighbor who watched her on Mondays, and she sat on the living room floor and let Maisie use her as furniture while she stared at the middle distance, and tried to separate the fury from the fear, because they were wound together in a way that made it hard to think. The fury was clean and bright and easy to understand. Fear was worse. The fear had Maisie's face on it. Because the filing was not just a legal document. It was a demonstration. Roman had just shown her exactly what he was capable of, and he had done it in the specific way that hurt, most not through threats or visible aggression, but through resources deployed quietly, in advance, so that by the time Claire understood what was happening, the structure was already built around her. She had described it to him, in the park, that specific pattern, in those specific words. She had told him that was why she had left. He had sat there and listened. And then he had allowed her to believe, for 1 hour and 40 minutes, that he was a different person. The performance had been impeccable. Maisie patted Claire's face with a sticky hand. "Mama, sad," she said. It wasn't a real question. Maisie was too young for real questions, but it had the shape of one, the toddler approximation of concern. "I'm okay, Bug," Claire said. She pulled Maisie into her lap and held her and stared at the wall. "He called Tuesday evening," she answered. She hadn't decided she was going to until she did. There was a half-second of silence on his end surprise, she thought, that she had picked up, and then his voice, careful and measured, the voice she now understood, was a controlled instrument. "I wanted to talk before Thursday," he said. "Do you know what I want to say to you right now?" Pause. "Yes." "Then why are you calling?" "Because I want to explain." "Explain." The word came out flat. "Which part?" "The part where you filed for emergency custody at 8:47 in the morning on the day you told me you weren't coming to make a fight? Or the part where you've had someone in my hospital for 6 weeks?" Silence.
Claire, don't.
Her voice cracked on the edge of the word and she pulled it back. "Do not say my name in that voice right now. Just tell me the truth. Did you file before you came to the park?" "Yes." The honesty was almost worse than a denial would have been. She had braced for deflection, and he gave her none. "The filing was a contingency," he said. "If you had refused any contact, if you had—" "Contingency." She repeated it back to him slowly. "You were sitting on a bench watching your daughter for the first time, and underneath it you had a contingency. It was already submitted. I couldn't unsubmit it without giving up your leverage. Yes, I understand how that works." She was pacing the kitchen now, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "I told you. I sat in front of you, and I described exactly what you do, how you build structures around people while they're not looking, and you sat there, and you listened, and you looked right at me. I know. And then you drove home to your structure. Claire, I have spent 2 years not knowing my daughter existed. 2 years. I'm not going to apologize for taking steps to ensure I wasn't shut out again. I never said I was going to shut you out. You hadn't said you weren't." The silence between them was the kind that has weight. "You could have told me," she said. "You could have called me before the park, and I've already taken a legal step, and I want you to know that before we meet. You didn't. You let me sit there believing one thing while another thing was true." He didn't answer that immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted slightly, less controlled. "I was afraid that if I told you, you'd disappear again. So you deceived me to prevent me from running." He stopped. "Do you hear yourself?" Another stop. Longer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." She stopped pacing. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below. "The hearing is Thursday," she said. "I know. Are you going to withdraw it?" Pause was 2 seconds too long. "I can't do that without losing your position." "I know." She closed her eyes. "Don't call me again before Thursday, Roman." She hung up. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she went and checked on Maisie, who was asleep with both rubber ducks and the complete serenity of someone who did not yet know that her parents were about to go to war. Thursday arrived, the way bad things arrive, with complete indifference to whether you were ready. The courthouse was 30 minutes from Claire's apartment. Margaret met her in the lobby at 8:15. Claire was in a dark blazer, and her hair was pulled back, and she had slept 4 hours, which was enough to function on, and she had left Maisie with the downstairs neighbor with the specific instruction not to let anyone she didn't know into the building. Roman was already in the courtroom. He was at petitioner's table with 2 attorneys and a paralegal, and he was in a dark suit that cost more than Claire's monthly rent, and he did not look at her when she walked in. She did not look at him either, or she tried not to. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. It was not dramatic in the way that courtroom scenes are dramatic in movies. It was procedural and precise, and it moved with the bureaucratic rhythm of a system that processed human catastrophe as efficiently as it could, which was not very efficiently at all. Roman's lead attorney, a man whom Margaret had clearly encountered before, given the particular flatness of her expression when he stood up, argued the emergency designation with a kind of smooth, practiced authority that comes from doing this specific thing in this specific building many times. He cited the duration of Maisie's life without paternal contact. He cited Claire's work hours. He cited the absence of any paternal figure in the household. He did not mention Roman's occupation, which was not a surprise. And he did not mention the 6 weeks of schedule documentation, which was, Margaret was good. She was better than good she was. The kind of lawyer who understood that the best arguments in family court are the ones that sound the most like common sense, and she delivered them with the unhurried confidence of someone who was not the least bit intimidated by expensive suits or smooth presentation. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s named Hartley. With reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on, listened to both sides with a face that revealed nothing, and asked 4 questions, all of them sharp. At the end, Judge Hartley denied the emergency designation. She found insufficient grounds for the emergency threshold. She ordered both parties to return in 30 days, with formal custody proposals for standard proceedings. She noted in language that was mild and measured, and nonetheless landed on Claire like cold water, that the court took a serious view of extended withholding of parental access where no documented safety concern was on record. No documented safety concern. Claire kept her face still through that. They were in the hallway afterward, Margaret and Claire, speaking quietly near a bank of windows, when Roman appeared at the end of the hall. His attorneys were behind him, but he left them there. He walked toward Claire. Margaret put a hand briefly on Claire's arm. "You don't have to, it's fine," Claire said. It was not fine. But she wasn't going to have this conversation removed through lawyers in a courthouse hallway, with Roman standing 20 feet away. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he looked like a man who had also not slept. "I'm not going to keep fighting you," he said. "I want you to know that." "I've heard that before." His jaw tightened. "The filing is going to standard proceedings." That's not nothing, Roman. That is my daughter's life being decided in a courtroom because you needed a contingency. I understand why you're angry, do you?" She kept her voice low. They were in a courthouse hallway, and she was not going to give this building a scene. "Because I'm standing here looking at you, and I keep trying to find the line between the Roman who held Maisie on a park bench and the Roman who had someone in my hospital for 6 weeks, and I can't find it. It's the same person. That's what I keep coming back to." He looked at her steadily. "Yeah, it is. So which one is true?" "Both," he said. "That's the problem." She stared at him. He held her gaze and didn't flinch from it, which was the most honest thing he'd done since he answered yes when she asked if he'd filed before the park. "Roman, I need you to do something." "What?" "I need you to tell me right now, with no one prompting you and nothing to gain by saying it, what do you actually want? Not the legal answer. Not the answer your attorneys coached. What do you actually want?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I want to know her," he said finally. "I want to know what she's like. What makes her laugh? Whether she's stubborn like me or stubborn like you, because either way, she's going to be impossible, and I want to see it." Something in his face shifted. "I want to not miss anything else. And me?" His eyes moved to her face. "That's not a question I'm allowed to answer right now." "Then answer the one you are allowed to answer. Is Maisie enough of a reason to stop the machinery? All of it. The attorneys and the filings and the contingencies. Can you turn that off? Can you trust me if I do?" "No," she said honestly. "Not yet. But I can't trust you at all while it's running." He looked past her for a moment, at the window and the gray November street beyond it. Then he looked back. "I'll talk to Carver," he said. About withdrawal? About withdrawal. She searched his face. She was very good at reading people. Medicine made you good at reading people, and so did 11 years of loving someone who communicated in layers. She looked at him for a long moment and tried to find the angle, the play, the thing underneath. She didn't find it, which did not mean it wasn't there. "Call me when it's done," she said. Not before. She walked back to Margaret. Call came Friday afternoon. 2 words. "It's withdrawn." Claire was in an exam room between patients when the call came, and she pressed the phone to her ear and stared at a diagram of the human spine on the wall across from her and said nothing for 3 full seconds. "Completely?" she said. "Completely. Standard proceedings suspended. Told Carver we're pursuing this privately." "Why?" Pause. "Because you were right about all of it. The contingency, the hospital, the bench, all of it was the same move. I've been running the same move for so long I don't notice anymore when I'm doing it." His voice was flat and deliberate, the sound of someone saying something they have thought about carefully. "I noticed this time." She sat down on the small wheeled stool in the corner of the exam room. "Roman, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just telling you what I did and why." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She hung up and sat in the exam room for 4 minutes before her next patient, thinking about contingencies and park benches and the specific difficulty of trusting someone who had given you every reason not to, and then done one inexplicable thing that didn't fit the pattern. Withdrawal didn't fit the pattern. The Romans she had left didn't withdraw. 3 weeks passed. Roman called twice. Both times he asked questions about Maisie specific, small, the kind of questions that didn't have strategic value. What was she eating now? Had she started stringing words together? Did she still do the forehead thing? Claire answered them. She didn't know why entirely. Maybe because the questions themselves were their own kind of answer to something. He asked, at the end of the second call, if he could come back to Columbus in 2 weeks. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 4 days. She talked to Rachel, who was cautious. She talked to Margaret, who was more cautious. She sat on the floor of Maisie's room after bedtime, in the dark, and thought about the word withdrawal and what it cost someone like Roman to say it. She called him back. 2 weeks, she said, same park, same conditions. Okay. And Roman, if there is anything running in the background this time, anything, I will find out. And I will take Maisie somewhere you will never locate us, and I will spend whatever it costs to keep it that way. Are we clear? We're clear. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks. She hung up. She sat in the dark kitchen and put her hands flat on the table and tried to think through what she was doing and why. And she came to the same place she always came to, which was Maisie, who pressed her forehead against people she decided to keep. Maisie, who had decided Roman was worth being in approximately 45 seconds in a park. Maisie, who deserved the truth of her own story, even when that truth was complicated and jagged and refused to resolve into anything clean. She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed. Not a call, a message from the same unknown number that had sent her the 8 words the first time. This time, it was longer. She read it once, quickly, and then again more slowly, and by the second reading, her hands were not steady. The message said, the withdrawal was real, but you should know why. Then he has a medical file, yours, from before you left. Prenatal vitamins, the first trimester blood work. He's known you were pregnant since 3 months after you left Chicago. He's known about Maisie since before she was born. Claire stared at the screen. The kitchen was very quiet. She read it a 3rd time. He has known since before she was born. The 2 years. The 2 times he asked his people to look. The okay, the park bench, the withdrawal, all of it. Every single moment of it. From a man who already knew. She set the phone face down on the table. She pressed both palms flat against the wood. She breathed through her nose. Outside, Columbus went on being Columbus, the neighbor's television. The music from the street, the city that had nothing to do with Roman Blackwood, in which she had built a life around a secret that had never, not for a single day, actually been a secret at all. She picked up the phone. She called the unknown number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She did not leave a message. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a very long time, and she thought about a man who had known she was carrying his child and had waited 2 years, 4 months. With what she now had to understand was a patience so deliberate it could only have been planned, and she tried to understand what kind of person did that, and whether it was mercy or strategy or something darker than either. And she could not find the answer because she did not yet know which version of Roman Blackwood she was actually dealing with. The one who had withdrawn, or the one who had always known and said nothing, or the possibility she was only now beginning to consider, slowly and with enormous reluctance, that both versions were true and that understanding which one mattered more was the question on which everything, her safety, Maisie's future, the 2 weeks from now in a park, would now depend entirely. She didn't sleep at all. Not the kind of not sleeping where you drift in and out and the alarm catches you mid-breath. Kind where you lie completely still in the dark. And your mind runs at full capacity for 6 straight hours, and by 4 in the morning, you're not tired anymore. You're just done with the pretense of rest. She got up at 4:12, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands, and watched the street below, which was empty and amber-lit and completely indifferent to the fact that everything she had believed about the last 2 years had just been revised. He had known. She kept returning to it, the way a tongue turns to a broken tooth compulsively, even though it hurt, even though the examination changed nothing. He had known she was pregnant. He had known before Maisie was born. He had sat on a medical record for 2 years and 4 months and done precisely nothing with it, which was either the most restrained thing she had ever heard of a man like Roman Blackwood doing, or the most patient. Couldn't tell the difference. That was the problem. With Roman, restraint and patience had always looked identical from the outside. The distinction lived in the intention underneath, and she had never been able to read his intentions cleanly, which was part of why she had left, because loving someone whose interior you cannot fully access is its own kind of vertigo. She drank the coffee. At 5:30, she called Margaret. "I know it's early," she said, when Margaret answered with the voice of someone who slept lightly by professional necessity. "It's fine. What happened?" Claire told her about the message. Margaret was quiet long enough that Claire could hear her moving, the particular sounds of someone sitting up and reaching for something to write with. "The prenatal records," Margaret said finally. "You went to a physician in Chicago?" "Once. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was 9 weeks. I went to a doctor I had never used before, paid cash, gave my real name because I was still—" She stopped. "I was still living there. I hadn't decided yet. But your name was on the record." "Yes. And your OB in Columbus?" "Different name on the intake form. I used my middle name and my mother's maiden name. I wasn't on his radar by then." She set the mug down. "The Chicago visit. That's the record he has. How did he get it?" It wasn't a question. They both understood how a man with Roman's resources and a motivated reason got access to a medical record that should have been protected. The how was almost irrelevant, Margaret. He knew before she was born. He knew the whole time. "I understand. What does that mean legally? The filing? The emergency petition if he already knew? Then the framing that I withheld Maisie from him?" "It complicates his position significantly," Margaret said. "If he had knowledge and chose not to act, that undermines his argument that every day of the status quo was ongoing harm to Maisie. He can't claim deprivation if he knew and did nothing. Can we prove he knew? That depends on the source of your information and whether that source will go on record. The text messages alone, anonymous. Then we'd need to independently verify the record access. That's possible but not fast. Claire, before we get to the legal strategy," Margaret paused. "Why did he wait? If he had that information, why not act on it immediately?" The question sat in the air of the kitchen. Claire had been turning it over for 4 hours. "I don't know," she said. "And that's what I need to find out." She did not call Roman. She called the unknown number again at 7 in the morning and again at noon and got voicemail both times. She did not leave messages. Whoever Sandra was, and she believed now that it was Sandra, the woman from the letter, the one who had worked inside Roman's organization, and left, she was careful, and careful people didn't respond to pressure. She waited. At 2:17 in the afternoon, a text came back. I'll meet you. Not on the phone. Tomorrow. There's a coffee shop on North High called Starliner. 10 in the morning. Come alone. Claire stared at the address. Called Rachel. I need you to come to Columbus, she said. Tonight if you can. I need someone with Maisie tomorrow morning. Rachel, to her enormous credit, asked only one question. How bad is it? I don't know yet, Claire said. That's why I need to go find out. Rachel arrived at 9:15 that evening, with a rolling bag and a bottle of wine. She sat on the counter without ceremony, and the particular kind of presence that older sisters have, the one that doesn't require explanation or preamble. She looked at Claire's face and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, sit down and tell me. Claire sat down and told her. Rachel listened without interrupting, which was its own form of love. She asked 3 questions at the end, all practical, and then she opened the wine and poured 2 glasses and pushed one across the table. You're going tomorrow, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And then what? And then I know something I don't know now. And then I decide what to do with it. And Roman? Claire picked up the glass. 2 weeks from now, he was supposed to come back to the park. Are you canceling it? She thought about Maisie, pressing her forehead against his jaw. She thought about his eyes closed, for that one unguarded second. She thought about the word withdrawal, and what it had cost him to mean it, and whether he had meant it, and whether knowing that he'd always known changed the meaning. No, she said. Rachel looked at her over the rim of her glass. Claire, I know. She drank, I know. Starliner Coffee was a narrow room with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and the kind of loyal morning crowd that minded its own business. Claire arrived at 9:52 and took a table near the back wall where she could see the door. 10:04, a woman came in. She was in her mid-40s, dark-haired, in a coat that was practical rather than stylish. She moved through the room with the careful non-attention of someone who had spent years being invisible in rooms where things happened. She saw Claire before Claire could indicate herself, and she came directly to the table and sat down without preamble. Sandra, Claire said, yes. She didn't offer a hand. She set her bag on her lap like a shield and looked at Claire steadily. I wasn't sure you'd come alone. I wasn't sure you'd come at all. Sandra scanned the room once, the automatic habit of someone trained to check exits. I've been careful about you for a long time, she said. The letter, the texts. I want you to know that none of it was easy to send. Why send them at all? Sandra looked at her hands on the table. She had the bitten-down nails of someone under chronic stress, and her ring finger had the faint indentation of a band recently removed. I worked for Roman for 6 years, she said. I started as a bookkeeper. By the end, I was in a position where I knew things I was never supposed to know. She looked up. He has a file on you. He's had it since before Maisie was born. The prenatal record is in it. So is your Columbus address. He's had your address for 14 months. The air went slightly thin. 14 months, Claire said. He's known where you live and where you work and where Maisie's daycare is for 14 months. Sandra said it evenly, like someone reporting facts who understands the facts are devastating and has prepared for that. He has never used any of it. No one from the organization has been sent there. No surveillance on the building. He looked at the file and then he locked it, and he didn't touch it again until the photograph. Why are you telling me this? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Because I have a daughter, she said. She's 7. And when I was inside that organization, I told myself that everything I was part of was separate from her, that the two things didn't touch. She looked at the table. They touch. Everything touches eventually. I left because I wanted her to have a mother she could tell the truth to. She reached into her bag and set a manila envelope on the table between them. This is a copy, she said. I made it the week before I left. The original is in Roman's personal safe in Chicago. She pushed it toward Claire. The file has everything. The medical record, the address history, the daycare enrollment. There's also a memo, 1 page in Roman's handwriting. Claire looked at the envelope. She did not pick it up immediately. What does the memo say? She asked. Sandra met her eyes. It says, let her go. She left because I gave her every reason to. If I show up now, I'm the same man she ran from. I'm not doing that to her again. Sandra paused. And then below that, one more line. What line? If she ever needs me, I'll be there. The coffee shop went on being a coffee shop around them. Someone laughed near the front window. The espresso machine ran through a cycle. Claire picked up the envelope. She held it in both hands without opening it. He knew where we were, she said slowly. For 14 months. He had the address, and the daycare, and the medical record, and he wrote that note, and he locked the file. Yes. And then the photograph. You appeared on a public platform connected to your real name. His people flagged it, automatically. They monitor for anything connected to him that might be a security issue. The photograph came to him as a routine alert. Sandra wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He didn't go looking that time. It found him. Claire sat with that. She thought about the voicemail, 20 months, said like someone reading a number too large to hold. She thought about the park bench, the leaf, the closed eyes. She thought about withdrawal, which she had called inexplicable because it didn't fit the pattern of the man she knew. Fit this pattern. It fit a man who had known for 14 months where his daughter slept and had chosen to stay away. Why the custody filing, she said. If this is true, why file? Sandra's jaw tightened slightly. Because Carver filed it. Roman's lead attorney. Roman had told Carver to explore options, back when he was first deciding how to approach you, and Carver is the kind of lawyer who moves on instructions without checking back. Roman didn't know it was filed until after. She looked at Claire directly. The withdrawal was not a tactic. He withdrew it because he found out what Carver did, and he was furious. I know because I was still in the building that day, and I heard things that are not consistent with performance. Claire stared at her. You're telling me he didn't order the filing. I'm telling you his attorney made a unilateral call, and Roman undid it the moment he knew. The table felt very small suddenly, the walls of the coffee shop very close. Why should I believe that? Claire said, not aggressively. She genuinely wanted to know. Sandra turned the coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. You shouldn't. Not on my word. But the file is in there. She nodded at the envelope. And Carver's email to Roman is in there too, from the day after the filing, where Carver explains what he submitted and why. And Roman's response is in there, which is 4 words. What 4 words? Fix it. Do it today. The envelope was heavier than paper should be. Claire set it on the table in front of her and looked at it. What do you want from this? She asked Sandra. Why does it matter to you how I use this? Sandra finished her coffee, set the cup down with a small definitive click. I want you to make an informed decision, she said. Whatever that decision is, you deserved the information from the beginning, and you didn't have it. Now you do. She reached for her bag. He's not a good man in the way that phrase usually means. He runs something that does real damage to real people and has for a long time. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm just telling you that the specific thing you believed about him, that he found out about Maisie and immediately started planning a legal takeover, that's not what happened. She stood up. The rest is yours to figure out, she said. She left. Claire sat alone at the table with the envelope and the noise of the coffee shop and the specific weight of information that rearranges everything you thought you were dealing with. She sat there for 22 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called Roman. He answered on the second ring. I need to see you, she said. Not in 2 weeks now. Today if you can get here. A beat. What happened? I know about the file. I know about the memo. I know about Carver. Her voice was steady in the way that means something underneath it is not. I need you to sit in front of me and tell me what is true and what isn't, because I am done making decisions based on incomplete information. Silence. I can be there by 4, he said. Not the park. My apartment. She had told herself she wouldn't do this. Margaret had told her not to do this. You know the address. A longer silence. Yeah, he said, I do. 4 o'clock. She hung up and called Rachel and told her to keep Maisie out until 6. Then she drove home, and she sat in the apartment with the envelope open on the kitchen table, reading every page, and she did not let herself decide anything yet. He knocked at 4:01. She opened the door. He was in the same heavy gray coat as the park, and he looked like someone who had driven 4 hours with something specific on his mind. His eyes went to the envelope on the kitchen table immediately, and something in his face confirmed that he knew what it was. "Come in," she said. He came in. She did not offer him coffee or a seat. She stood at the kitchen table with her hand on the envelope and looked at him across 6 feet of linoleum floor. "The memo," she said. "In your handwriting. Let her go. Did you write it?" "Yes." "When?" "About a month after I got the medical record. February, 3 years ago. You've known since before she was born." "Yes." She looked at him. He held it without flinching. "Why didn't you come?" she said. 14 months. "You had this address." "You had, 'cause I wrote the memo." His voice was flat and direct. "Because I understood, when I read that record and understood what it meant, that you had left before you knew you were pregnant. You didn't run because of the baby. You ran because of me. And showing up on your doorstep with that information would have been the same move. The same thing you left to get away from." He looked at the table. "So I didn't come. You didn't come," she repeated. "For 14 months. No, and then the photograph. The photograph was different. I wasn't going looking. I wasn't deploying anything. It landed in front of me, and He stopped. Something moved across his face. "She had my eyes, Claire. In a photograph on a phone screen at 11 at night, I could see she had my eyes. And then you called. And then I called." She picked up the envelope and held it. "Custody filing." His jaw tightened. "That wasn't—" "I know. I have Carver's email. I have your response." She looked at him. 4 words. It was the right call to undo it. Yes. It was. She set the envelope down. "Why didn't you tell me? When I confronted you about the filing, why didn't you tell me it was Carver?" "Because you would have thought it was a cover story." "Maybe. And because, even if you'd believed me, the filing existed, and I had told Carver to explore options, which is how it happened. I gave the instruction. The specific outcome wasn't what I intended, but I'm not going to stand there and act like my hands are clean because the particular move wasn't the one I authorized." She stared at him. She stopped. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 11 years. He didn't say anything. Roman. She came around the table so she was in front of him, and there was nothing between them, no table. No paperwork. No lawyers. Nothing to look at except each other. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not give me the answer you think I want." "Okay. Are you capable of being in Maisie's life without trying to run it?" "Not just now, not just while you're trying to establish access. Long term. When it's inconvenient, when I make decisions you disagree with, when she's sick and you're in Chicago and you can't control what's happening, can you be a father without turning it into a territory?" He held her gaze. She could see him working through the answer, not manufacturing it, actually working through it, which was a different thing. "I don't know," he said. She blinked. "I don't know," he said again. "I want to say yes. I'm standing here wanting to give you the yes, because I understand that's what needs to be true. But I'd be doing the thing you just asked me not to do, which is give you the answer I think you want." He looked at her steadily. "What I know is that when I read that memo I wrote, the one you have in that envelope, I meant every word of it. And I know that when I heard you say Maisie's name on the phone, something in me decided that whatever it cost, I was going to figure out how to be the person she deserved. Whether I can sustain that," he exhaled. "I think I can. But I can't prove it to you in your kitchen." She looked at him for a long time. "No," she said. "You can't." She picked up the envelope and put it in the kitchen drawer, under the silverware, next to the other envelope, the one with the list she had made when she couldn't sleep. "You can see Maisie," she said, "in 2 weeks the park." What we agreed. "Okay," and Roman, she stopped. He waited. "If you ever run anything in the background again, anything, an attorney, a contact, a file on me, or anyone around me, I will take Maisie and go somewhere that isn't Ohio and isn't anywhere connected to our history, and you will have to find us again. And this time I'll know you're looking. I understand." "Good." She moved toward the door. "Drive safe." He didn't move immediately. "Claire." She turned. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for everything. Some of it I'm still working out, whether I'd change it. But for the years in the marriage when I built the cage and didn't see the door, I'm sorry for that." She looked at him. "Go home, Roman," she said. He left. She closed the door and stood with her back against it in the empty apartment and breathed. 2 weeks. She went back to work. She took Maisie to the park and the grocery store and a Saturday morning music class that Maisie attended with the intensity of someone being initiated into a serious discipline. She slept imperfectly. She ate. She talked to Margaret and to Rachel and to no one else about the specifics. She read the memo 3 more times. Let her go. She left because I gave her every reason to. If I show up now, I'm the same man she ran from. I'm not doing that to her again. And then below it, in the same handwriting, pressed harder than the rest. If she ever needs me, I'll be there. She kept trying to find the play in it. The angle. The long game logic of a man who understood that patience was a tool. She found it sometimes and didn't find it other times, and eventually she decided that the uncertainty itself was information. That she did not know, could not know. And that functioning as though she knew in either direction was a form of dishonesty she owed neither herself nor Maisie. What she knew was this: he had stayed away for 14 months when he didn't have to. What she didn't know was whether that was mercy or strategy. What she was going to do was stand in a park in 2 weeks and watch him with Maisie and see what her gut told her when the machinery was out of the way and it was just the 3 of them and a bunch of falling leaves. And she was going to trust that gut, because it was the only instrument she had that Roman couldn't file paperwork against. The morning of the park visit, Maisie woke up wrong. Not sick, not injured, just wrong. The particular wrongness of a toddler whose internal calibration has been disrupted by some unknowable variable. She was hot and then cold, and she refused breakfast, and she cried with the full-body investment of someone who had decided this was going to be a crying morning and no amount of rubber ducks or bear books or strategic distraction was going to change that. Claire held her, walked with her, checked her temperature 3 times, because she was a physician and physicians do that when their child feels warm even when they know. It's probably nothing. 101.2. Not dangerous. Not nothing. She stood in the kitchen with Maisie on her hip and her phone in her other hand. She called Roman. Maisie's got a low fever, she said when he answered. I don't think it's anything serious, but I'm not bringing her out today. Pause. Is she okay? She's not happy and she's warm. I'm watching her. He stopped. Is there anything you need? She looked at Maisie, who had stopped crying and was now pressing her hot forehead against Claire's shoulder in the specific way of children, who are sick and want nothing except their person. No, she said. I just wanted to let you know before you drove. I'm already on the 70. She closed her eyes briefly. Roman, I'm not coming to push anything. I'd like to be close by, in case. I can stay in my car, I can go sit somewhere. His voice broke off and restarted. I'm not used to being 200 miles away when she's sick. She stood in the kitchen with her sick daughter and a man on the phone who was 2 hours out and already driving. She made a decision. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks from here, she said. On 5th. It's called Fox in the Snow. Go there and wait. I'll call you if anything changes, either way. Okay. And Roman. This is not an invitation to the apartment. I know. Fox in the Snow, I'll be there. She hung up. Maisie lifted her head and looked at Claire with bleary, warm eyes. Duck, she said, weakly but with intent. Yeah, Claire said. Let's go get the duck. By mid-afternoon, Maisie's temperature had climbed to 1027 and was not dropping. Claire was not panicking. She was a physician. She understood the physiology. She understood that a fever of 102 in a toddler with no other alarming symptoms was a body doing exactly what a body was supposed to do. She was also a mother, and those 2 things lived in different rooms of herself, and the physician kept doing the assessment, while the mother sat at the back of her throat and said, "This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong." She called the pediatric line. She got the advice she expected: fluids, monitor, come in if it hits 104 or if there were other symptoms. She sat on the floor of Maisie's room with Maisie in her lap, and her daughter's hot little body pressed against her chest, and she thought about calling Rachel and decided against it because Rachel was 4 hours away and there was nothing Rachel could do. Picked up her phone. She called Roman. He answered on the first ring. It's 1027, she said. I'm watching it. The pediatric line says monitor, but she stopped. She was not going to say out loud the thing that was happening in the back of her throat. What do you need me to do? Roman said. Not I'll get a private doctor. Not I'll handle it. Not I know someone. What do you need me to do? Closed her eyes. Come to the building, she said. Don't come up. Sit in the lobby. She breathed. I just want someone close by who gives a damn about her. I'm 6 minutes away, he said. I'll be in the lobby. He was. She knew because she checked the lobby camera on her building's app twice in the next hour and saw him in the chair by the mailboxes, coat on, not on his phone, not talking to anyone. Just there. At 1035 she called Margaret because 1035 is not an emergency, but it is not nothing. At 1038 she picked up Maisie and her diaper bag and her own coat and went downstairs. Roman stood up the moment the elevator opened. He looked at Maisie flushed, half asleep against Claire's shoulder, and his face did something complicated and quick. Hospital, he said. I want to have her looked at. I'm probably being overly cautious, but I don't care. Let's go. He didn't take Maisie from her. He didn't direct. He held the door and matched Claire's pace, and when she got to her car, he opened the back door and held it while she got Maisie into the car seat, and then he got into the passenger seat without being asked and without explanation, and Claire pulled out of the spot and drove. What's the nearest pediatric ER? He said. Nationwide Children's. I know it. She merged onto Fifth. I'm a physician. I know how to get there. I know you do, he said. I'm asking because I need something to do with my hands. She glanced at him. His hands were flat on his knees, and she could see the tension in them from the driver's seat, the specific physical effort of a man who is built to act, sitting in a passenger seat. Navigate, she said. Keep eyes on traffic. Done. They drove. The ER was the particular controlled chaos of a children's hospital on a Sunday afternoon. Since Claire gave her name and Maisie's information, and they were triaged within 10 minutes, which was fast enough to suggest the triage nurse had read the mother's face correctly. Roman sat in the waiting area. Claire went back with Maisie. The physician they got was young early 30s, fast and competent, and not interested in Claire's assessment until Claire said, I'm a physician, and then he recalibrated. And they talked through the presentation together in the efficient shorthand of the same profession, which Maisie mostly slept through. Viral, almost certainly viral, supportive care. Come back if it exceeds 104, or there were any signs of respiratory distress. They were discharged in 45 minutes. Roman was in the same chair. He stood up when Claire came out with Maisie, who was drowsy and flushed, but had graduated to holding the left rubber duck, which Claire had grabbed from the diaper bag. Viral, Claire said. They want to see her back if she spikes above 104. She needs rest and fluids and time. Roman looked at Maisie. Maisie, half asleep against Claire's shoulder, opened one eye, registered Roman, and held out the duck. He took it. Thank you, he said very low. Maisie closed her eye again. They stood in the middle of a pediatric ER lobby on a Sunday evening, and Claire was exhausted in the specific boneless way that comes after a fear that doesn't fully materialize, but was real while it lasted. And Roman was standing there holding a rubber duck that had been offered to him by a sick toddler who had decided again and without apparent revision that he was someone to give things to. My car's in the visitor lot, Roman said. I know. He stopped. Can I follow you home? Not come up. Just follow you home. She looked at him. The duck was in his hand. She thought about the memo in the drawer under the silverware and the 4 words he'd sent Carver and the 6 minutes between her call and his arrival in the lobby, and the way he'd said, "What do you need me to do?" without any qualifier attached. You can follow me home, she said. He did. He parked across the street while she got May up ZSS and into pajamas and into the crib with the left duck, and she stood in Maisie's doorway, listening to the ragged, slightly wheezy breathing of a child with a fever and a full belly of children's Tylenol, and told herself it was fine. It was fine, the doctor said it was fine. She went to the window. His car was still across the street. The engine was off. He wasn't going anywhere. She stood at the window for a long moment. Then she went to the intercom and buzzed the street door. Come up, she said. She heard his footsteps in the stairwell. She opened the door before he could knock because she didn't want the knock to wake Maisie, and she stepped back to let him in and closed the door quietly behind him. He cowned like green wood splitting. He came in and stood in the center of the kitchen and looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there was too much to say and Maisie was sleeping 20 feet away, and this was not the time for any of it. "Sit down," Claire said. He sat. She put the kettle on. They sat at the kitchen table with tea they didn't particularly want, and the sound of Maisie's breathing on the monitor between them, and they were both quiet for a long time. Then Roman said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the file." "I know. I didn't know how to." He stopped. "I kept going back and forth. If I told you, it would look like I was using it. If I didn't, I was lying by omission. I couldn't find the version where telling you went well." "There wasn't one," she said. "There's no version of that revelation that doesn't land badly. But I needed to know, yeah." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You wrote that memo," she said. "Let her go." "Yeah." "Did you believe it when you wrote it?" He looked at the table. "Yes." "Did you believe it at the park? When you were sitting on that bench?" A longer pause. "I believed it right up until I saw her," he said. "And then believing it and doing it became two different things." She looked at him. The kitchen was small, and the light was the particular yellow of an evening lamp, and somewhere in Finn Building, the neighbor's television was playing something with a laugh track, and outside Columbus was doing what it always did. And Roman Blackwood was sitting at her kitchen table, holding a mug of tea with both hands, and his face, when he thought she wasn't looking directly at him, was the face of someone who had run out of angles. Just a man, sitting in a small kitchen, listening to his daughter breathe on a monitor. "Roman," she said. He looked up. She opened her mouth to say something, she wasn't entirely sure what. Something true, something that acknowledged the particular enormity of where they had arrived, and how. And then the monitor crackled, and Maisie made a sound. The specific escalating sound that preceded full waking, and the full waking would escalate to crying if nobody moved. Claire was out of her chair before she finished the thought. She was in Maisie's doorway, watching her daughter shift restlessly in the crib, when she heard Roman come up behind her and stop just outside the doorframe, not coming in, just present, a body in the dark hallway. Maisie's eyes opened. She found Claire immediately in the way of children, who always know exactly where their person is. Then she looked past Claire, into the hallway. She found Roman. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, fever-flushed and groggy and still holding the left duck. Then she reached her arms up, not toward Claire, toward the doorway. Toward him. Roman looked at Claire. Claire stepped aside. He came into the room. He lifted Maisie out of the crib with both hands, careful and deliberate, and she immediately curled into him with the trusting bonelessness of a sick child who has decided where she wants to be and is not interested in discussion. Roman stood in the center of the small dark bedroom, holding his daughter, one hand spanning her small back, and he looked at Claire over the top of Maisie's head. She looked back at him. There was a long quiet. Not a comfortable quiet. Too much was still unresolved for that. Too much was still raw and uncertain, and requiring navigation that hadn't happened yet. But it was a real quiet, not a strategic one. The kind that happens when two people have run out of posturing and are just standing in the same room with the same thing between them. "She needs to go back down," Claire said softly. He said, "Tell me how. Walk with her, just back and forth. She'll go in about 5 minutes." He started walking. Claire watched from the doorway. 4 minutes and 40 seconds by the clock on her phone. Maisie's grip on his collar loosened, and her breathing deepened, and Roman stood still in the center of the room and looked at Claire, and she nodded. He put her down. He tucked the left duck against her side. He straightened up slowly and came to the door. And they both stood in the hallway in the dark, and Maisie's breathing settled and steadied on the monitor, and neither of them moved for a long time. "You should go," Claire finally said. "Yeah." He didn't go immediately. He stood in the hallway and looked at the door of Maisie's room, and his face in the dark hallway was doing something she had no word for, something composed of too many moving parts to name. Then he looked at Claire. "I know I don't deserve it," he said. "Any of it. I know that. He stopped. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm just asking for the chance to be different than I was, because I understand now what I couldn't understand before. She looked at him. What couldn't you understand before? She said. He was quiet for a moment. That the most important thing I could do, he said, was exactly what the memo said. Let her go, because it was the only thing that left any door open. He met her eyes. I just didn't know which door it was going to be. The hallway was very quiet. Maisie breathed steadily on the monitor. Claire looked at Roman Blackwood in the dim hallway of her small Columbus apartment, and she thought about all the things she still didn't know, all the distance still to be covered, all the legitimate reasons to keep every door closed and the windows locked and the perimeter intact. She thought about all of that, and then she said, "Same time next week." The park. Something in his face shifted, quietly, completely. "I'll be there," he said. He left. She closed the door in green wood splitting. She closed the door and leaned her in the dark entry and listened to the sound of her daughter sleeping through the monitor, steady and slow and entirely at peace, and she stood there for a long time before she moved. Maisie's fever broke at 3 in the morning. Claire knew, because she was awake when it happened, sitting in the rocking chair in the corner of Maisie's room, not sleeping, not reading, just present in the way that mothers are present when something is wrong with their child. And proximity is the only available medicine. She had her hand on Maisie's back, and she felt the moment the heat shifted, the skin going from that particular dry burn to something cooler and damp, and she sat very still for a full minute, making sure it was real before she let herself exhale. Z slept through it. She had no idea that her temperature had spiked to 103.8 at midnight, or that her mother had stood in the bathroom for 10 minutes at 1 in the morning arguing with herself about whether to call Roman, or that she had ultimately not called him because she needed to understand what it meant, that calling him was this instinct, what that said, about where they were, and whether where they were was a place she had chosen, or a place she had drifted to without noticing. She sat in the rocking chair until 4. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table with it, and thought clearly, for the first time in weeks, about what she actually wanted. Not what was safe, not what was defensible in a courtroom, or justifiable to Margaret, or explainable to Rachel. What she, Claire Whitmore, who had driven out of Chicago at 34 years old, with a secret and a suitcase, and managed to build a life around both of them, what she actually wanted, from whatever came next. The answer was not simple, and it was not comfortable, and it did not resolve into anything clean. But it was honest. She sat with it until the light changed outside, and Maisie made her waking up sounds from the monitor, and then she got up and went to get her daughter, and that was that. Roman came to the park the following Saturday. Maisie was fully recovered, energetic in the specific overcorrecting way of toddlers after illness, as though the body had decided to compensate for lost time by being aggressively, relentlessly alive. She hit the grass at a pace that suggested she had objectives. Roman arrived exactly on time. He crouched down when Maisie came for him. She had dispensed with the preliminary leaf offering this time, and went directly for his coat collar, and he picked her up, and she grabbed his face with both hands, and examined him with her usual forensic attention. "You were sick," Roman told her very seriously. Maisie patted his cheek. "Duck," she says. "I know. I still have the duck from last time." He reached into his coat pocket and produced the left duck, which he had apparently been carrying around Chicago for a week. Maisie's face resolved into pure satisfaction. Claire watched this from 6 feet away and did not say anything. They walked. They sat by the fountain. Maisie demanded to be put down, and then demanded to be picked up again, and then found a stick that became the primary focus of the next 20 minutes. Roman held the stick when she offered it. He gave it back when she took it. He followed slow, purposeful circuit of the fountain edge, with the attention of someone who had decided this was the most important thing happening anywhere in the world. After all, Maisie tired herself out and consented to being put in the stroller, and Roman pushed it while Claire walked beside him, and they were quiet for the length of the path that ran along the east side of the park. "I want to talk about something," Claire said. "Okay. Not here. She's going to fall asleep in about 10 minutes, and I don't want to have this conversation in pieces." Where there's a bench at the far end. It's quieter. They walked. Maisie was asleep by the time they reached the bench. Completely, instantly, the boneless sleep of a toddler who had overextended. Claire positioned the stroller and Roman sat beside her, not close, a careful distance, and they both looked at the sleeping child for a moment. Then Claire said, "I know about everything." He nodded slowly. He had known this was coming since she'd called him the week before and said, "I know about the file." The file, the memo, the 14 months. She looked at the path in front of them. "Sandra, is she okay?" he said immediately. "She's fine. She didn't ask me to protect her, but I'm not going to tell you anything that would. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to know she was okay." Claire glanced at him. Something about the immediacy of the question, the genuine quality of the concern, registered. "She is," Claire said. "She wanted me to have the full picture. She thought I deserved it. She's right, Roman." She turned on the bench to face him properly. "I need to say some things to you, and I need you to not respond until I'm done. Can you do that?" He looked at her, nodded. "I left you because I was disappearing," she said. Not dramatically. Slowly. The way things disappear slowly when they're surrounded by something stronger. Every decision I made inside our marriage eventually ran through you, through your approval, your assessment of the risk, your judgment about what was appropriate. I told myself for years that it was just how you were, that you didn't mean it the way it felt, that loving someone who needed to control things wasn't the same as being controlled. She kept her voice even. And then I got pregnant, alone, in our house while you were in a meeting, and my first thought wasn't joy or fear, or any of the things you're supposed to feel. My first thought was, he will own this. He will decide everything about this child's life, because that is what he does with everything he loves. Roman's hands were flat on his knees. He was still. "That thought scared me more than anything else has ever scared me," she said. "More than leaving, more than being alone and broke in a new city with no support. More than doing it by myself." She looked at Maisie, sleeping. "So I made a choice that I knew was going to cost someone, something. I knew it would cost you. I knew what it would mean for Maisie to grow up without a father. I made it anyway because I believed the alternative was worse, and I still believe that. The alternative, with the man you were, would have been worse." She paused. Roman said nothing. He was doing what she'd asked. "But the man you were is not the same as what you've shown me in the last 2 months," she said. "The file, the memo, the 14 months of staying away when you didn't have to. What you did at the hospital coming and sitting in the lobby and not making it about anything except being close by." She took a breath. "And I don't know what to do with that. Because I built a very careful argument for why you were a specific kind of person, and you keep doing things that don't fit the argument." She looked at him. "Your turn," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not collecting himself. Just sitting in it, the way you sit in something heavy before you try to speak through it. "When I found the medical record," he said, "the first thing I felt was, it wasn't anger at you. I want to say that because I know that's probably what you expected. The first thing I felt was this specific shame, because I understood immediately why you hadn't told me. I didn't need it explained. I could trace every step of your logic, and I recognized every step, because the fear that drove you was the same thing I had taught you to be afraid of." He looked at his hands. "That's not a comfortable thing to sit with," he said. "Understanding that your wife ran from you while she was pregnant because you had spent years making her believe, reasonably, that you would take the child. That she wasn't wrong. That if she had come to me at 11 weeks and said, 'I'm pregnant and I'm leaving,' I would have..." He stopped. "I would have done what I always do. I would have decided I knew best. I would have built a structure and called it protection." "Yes," Claire said quietly. "So I wrote the memo because I needed to make it real. I needed to put it in writing so I couldn't talk myself out of it later, the way I talk myself out. Most things I don't want to accept." "Let her go. She left because I gave her every reason to." He exhaled. "And I meant it. And I sat with your address and your schedule for 14 months, and I did not move, because moving would have been the same thing. Showing up uninvited with the knowledge I wasn't supposed to have, that's not love. The thing you left." The bench was cold. The park had gone to afternoon quiet around them, the kind that falls when the families with young children have packed up and gone home and the light starts to go horizontal. And then the photograph, Claire said. And then the photograph. He looked at the sky for a moment. I didn't plan the call. I know you probably don't believe that. But I sat with the photograph for 3 hours and I was not going to call, and then I called. Because she had my eyes in a photograph on a phone screen, and I understood in that moment that I had been living with an abstraction. Pregnancy record was a document. The address was a street name on a page. But a photograph of a child with your hands, and my eyes that was not an abstraction anymore. He looked at Maisie. She was real, he said simply. Claire followed his gaze. Maisie was deeply, thoroughly asleep, lips slightly parted, the left duct tucked under her arm, with a grip that persisted even in unconsciousness. The Carver filing, Claire said. I know, I need to hear it from you, not from a document. He nodded. I told Carver to explore options, weeks before I called you. I was working through it, trying to understand all the angles, he made a short sound that was not quite a laugh, which is exactly the problem. I approach everything like a negotiation. I look for leverage before I know if I need it. Carver interpreted explore options as proceed, which he shouldn't have done without checking back, but I created the conditions for it. He looked at her directly. When I found out he'd filed, I was in a meeting with 3 other people, and I told them to leave the room. The email was 4 words, because I needed less than 4 words to express what I wanted done. And then you came to the park and said you weren't making it a fight. And then I came to the park, and by the time I walked through that entrance, I had convinced myself that the filing was a formality, that it existed as a safety net and would never need to be used, that it wasn't a contradiction, a beat. It was a contradiction. I didn't want to see it because I was about to meet my daughter for the first time, and I didn't have the capacity to also sit with the fact that I had once again done the thing. Claire looked at him. Did you know you were going to see her, she said, when you pulled into that parking lot? Did you know she was going to be there? I knew you said you were bringing her. He paused. I didn't know what it was going to feel like. What did it feel like? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Like everything I thought I understood about myself was suddenly inadequate, he said. Like I had been operating at a scale I thought was correct, and then she walked across the grass. With that leaf and the scale changed completely, and nothing I knew how to do was sized for it. The afternoon light had gone almost gold. Maisie shifted in the stroller and settled again. Claire put her hands in her coat pockets and thought about what came next, which she had been thinking about for a week and had not resolved and was not going to resolve on a park bench in November, but needed to begin somewhere. I'm not offering to reconcile, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not standing at the edge of something with you. I am standing at a beginning, which is completely different. He looked at her. A beginning of what, he said. Of trying. Of seeing if the person you're describing, the one who wrote that memo, the one who drove from Chicago to sit in a hospital lobby, whether that person is consistent. Whether he shows up when there's nothing to gain. She held his gaze. Because the Roman I married was excellent at grand gestures. He was very good at arriving at important moments. What he was not good at was the ordinary Tuesday when nothing was at stake, and the choice between control and trust was quiet and easy to rationalize. Ordinary Tuesdays, he said. Those are the ones that actually matter. He nodded slowly. I know, so here's what I'm offering, she said. You come to Columbus. Not every weekend, not on a schedule designed by a lawyer you call, and we talk, and we figure out what makes sense for Maisie. You build a relationship with her, slowly, at her pace, and you do not arrive with an agenda. You don't use your resources to monitor anything related to our lives. If there's something you need to know, you ask me. And you'll answer? If it's about Maisie, yes. Always, she looked at the path. If it's about other things, I'll decide case by case. Okay, and Roman, the organization. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to dismantle your entire life overnight, she said. I'm not naive about how that works or how long it takes. But if Maisie is going to know you, really know you, spend time in your world eventually, then I need to know that world is moving in a direction that doesn't end with her being collateral in someone else's problem. I've already started, he said. She looked at him. Delegation started 6 weeks ago, he said. I've been moving legitimate operations into proper management. The rest, he exhaled. It takes time. The kind of infrastructure I'm talking about doesn't come apart cleanly or fast. The direction is set. Why 6 weeks ago? He looked at her. Because of the photograph. Because the moment I saw it, I understood that if I was going to ask to be in her life, I needed to be the kind of person who should be. She studied his face. She was looking for the angle again. The habit was deep. She thought she might spend years breaking it, this reflex to search for the layer underneath. She didn't find one. Show me, she said finally. Not now. Over time. Show me the ordinary Tuesdays, I will, he said. They sat on the bench until the light went, and the park got cold, and then Claire woke Maisie up, Maisie, who surfaced from sleep with the mild outrage of someone interrupted mid-dream and communicated this through a sound that carried across the empty park. And they walked back to the park entrance together, the three of them, and the walk was nothing dramatic. It was cold, and Maisie wanted to be carried, and Roman carried her. And they passed the fountain and the bench by the entrance and the maple tree that had shed six of its leaves onto the path. And it was quiet and ordinary, and therefore exactly the kind of thing Claire had said mattered most. At the park entrance, Maisie reached for Claire, the familiar transfer, and Roman handed her over and they stood on the sidewalk. I'll call on Tuesday, he said. Okay. He started to go. Roman, he stopped. She shifted Maisie on her hip. Maisie had already relocated her head to Claire's shoulder with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where she was most comfortable. The memo, Claire said. If she ever needs me, I'll be there. You wrote that. Yeah. She needed you last Sunday night. He held very still, and you were there, Claire said. She let that sit between them. Then she turned and walked toward the car, and she did not look back. But she heard him standing there for a long moment before she heard his footsteps going the other direction. And she thought about what it meant to say something to a person without asking for anything in return, and whether that constituted a kind of beginning or just the acknowledgement of one. She decided it was enough for now. It was enough. Winter arrived with its usual indifference. December came and Roman called on Tuesdays, sometimes Wednesdays, sometimes both. The calls were not long. They covered Maisie's week, what she had learned, what she had objected to, the ongoing duck situation, the advancement of her vocabulary, which was expanding at a rate that Claire found slightly alarming and mostly delightful. He asked questions. She answered them. Occasionally they talked about other things, his work, her patience in the abstract way that protected privacy, the logistics of the holidays. The question of what visiting Columbus in December would look like, and whether Maisie was old enough to understand the Christmas tree or would simply attempt to dismantle it. She would attempt to dismantle it. They both knew this. He came in December twice. Both times they went to the park, and then when the park got too cold for Maisie's tolerance, they came back to the apartment. He sat at the kitchen table. He played with Maisie on the living room floor. He helped with dinner once, not in the taking over way she had braced for, but in the I was told to stir. This way of someone following instructions, which cost him something visible and which she respected. He left before Maisie's bedtime, both times, without being asked to. That was an ordinary Tuesday thing. She noticed it. January was hard, not between them, between Claire and the general weight of winter and work, and the specific exhaustion of single parenting in a season that made everything slower and heavier. She had 2 difficult cases at the practice, in the same week, the kind that kept her up at night, running through what she could have done differently, the physician's particular self-interrogation that doesn't respect off hours. She called Roman on a Thursday because it was the only night she had to herself, and she was too tired to be strategic about who she called. He talked to her for an hour and 20 minutes. About nothing, mostly. About a restaurant he'd gone to in Chicago that had been inexplicably bad. About a book he'd started reading because someone had recommended it, and he'd gotten 3 chapters in before he understood it was a self-help book in disguise, which he delivered with the specific indignation of a man who felt deceived. About Maisie's recent declaration that bananas were yucky, which was new and troubling. He did not ask what was wrong. He just talked The way someone talks when they understand that the person on the other end needs to not be responsible for the direction of the conversation. She fell asleep on the couch at 10:40 with the phone still in her hand. In the morning, she had a text. Talk tomorrow if you need. Or not. Either is fine. She sat with that for a while. Then she texted back. Same time next week? He answered, I'll be there. February brought a conversation she had not planned to have. Roman was in the apartment a Saturday, Maisie napping, the two of them at the kitchen table with coffee, and she found herself saying something that had been sitting in the back of her mind for weeks without her quite identifying it. The organization, she said. The transition. How is it actually going? He looked at her carefully. You really want to know? I'm asking, he told her. Not vaguely, not in the broad strokes he had offered before. The specific shape of it, which parts had been moved into legitimate management, which parts were complicated, because legitimate didn't fully describe the history of how they'd been acquired, which relationships were difficult to sever cleanly, and why. He talked for a long time, and he talked honestly, which meant it wasn't a reassuring picture. It was a picture of something in process, incomplete, moving in the right direction, but not clean and not fast. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, How long? Best case, another 18 months, before the parts I'm most worried about are fully separated from anything that touches Maisie. And worst case, longer, depending on things I can't fully control. She turned her coffee cup in a slow circle. I appreciate you telling me the actual answer, she said. You asked for the actual answer. Most people, when someone asks for the actual answer, give them a better version of it. Yeah. Well, he looked at the table. I've been trying to stop doing that. She looked at him. He was 43 years old and had lines in his face that weren't there when she'd met him. And hands that were still always, too still. The stillness of someone who learned early that visible agitation was information you couldn't afford to give away. He was sitting in her kitchen on a Saturday in February, and his coffee was getting cold because he'd been talking, and he looked not comfortable, exactly, but present. Actually present in the way that meant not already halfway to the next move. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. The memo. The 14 months. You made a choice that cost you something serious. You missed her first steps. You missed her first birthday. She looked at him steadily. If you had to make it again, knowing what it cost, would you? He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which was visible in the quality of his silence. Yes, he said. Why? Because the alternative was arriving on your doorstep with knowledge I wasn't supposed to have, which would have confirmed every reason you left. You would have run, and this time I wouldn't have blamed you, and I wouldn't have had... He stopped. He looked at the door of Maisie's room. I wouldn't have any of this. Whatever this is. She followed his gaze. What do you think this is? She said. He turned back to her. I think it's the first honest thing we've had, he said. I think everything before it was real. What I felt was real. What we had was real, but it was built on something that wasn't. On me believing that my version of love was the only version that would keep people safe. He looked at her without flinching. This is what's left, after I stopped believing that. Claire sat with that. Outside, February did what February does, indifferent and gray. I don't know what I want, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not withholding it strategically. I genuinely don't know. Some days I think we're building something, and some days I think we're two people who share a child and have learned to be civil, and both of those things can be true at the same time. Yeah, he said. They can. I need you to be okay with not knowing. I am, Roman. She met his eyes. That's an ordinary Tuesday answer. Anyone can say they're okay with uncertainty when they're sitting in a warm kitchen in February. The question is what it looks like in 6 months when it's still uncertain and you're still driving 4 hours and still sleeping in a hotel room 3 blocks away because I haven't. She stopped. Because you haven't invited me closer, he said. Yes. Claire, his voice was quiet. I sat with your address for 14 months. I know how to wait for things that matter. She looked at him for a long time. Then Maisie's voice came from the monitor awake, certain of her needs, already escalating, and the moment dissolved the way. Moments dissolve when there's a toddler in the next room. which is completely and without ceremony. Claire got up. Roman got up too, automatically, and then stopped himself. She saw him stop himself. She nodded at the door. "Come on," she said. They went together. Spring came slowly. The way spring always comes in Ohio, reluctantly, backward, 2 warm days, and then another week of gray before the warmth finally decided to commit. The park came back into use, and the Saturday visits extended, and Maisie learned the word daddy sometime in some March and deployed it with the casual authority of someone who had simply been waiting for the right name and had now found it. The first time she said it in the middle of the park, running toward him, "Daddy, Daddy," Daddy Roman stopped walking. He crouched down to catch her. He held her and looked at Claire over the top of her head, and his face was the thing it did sometimes that she had no word for, the thing with too many components. Claire was getting better at letting herself see it. She didn't look away. In April, Margaret called. Not about anything urgent, a check-in, a professional courtesy, the kind of call that said, "I'm still here if you need me." "How are things?" Margaret said. "Complicated," Claire said. "But okay. He's still showing up every week." She paused. "More some weeks. A beat. I told you." "Complicated." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Claire, I'm your lawyer, not your friend, and I want to stay in my lane. But I've dealt with a lot of difficult situations between people, and I've learned that complicated usually means something is true that the person isn't quite ready to say out loud yet." Claire looked out the window at the April street. "Probably," she said. "Take your time," Margaret said. "That's all. Just take your time." Maisie's 2nd birthday was in May. They kept it small, just the 3 of them and Rachel, who drove from Portland with the rolling bag and a stuffed animal the size of a small country that Maisie immediately adopted and named Duck 2, logic being impeccable. Roman arrived with a gift that was appropriately sized and not extravagant, which Claire recognized as deliberate restraint that had cost him something. They ate cake. Maisie distributed cake to everyone present with democratic generosity, including a portion she attempted to give to Duck 2. Frome sang the birthday song with the particular awkwardness of a man who does not sing but has decided this is non-negotiable, and Maisie found this hilarious, which meant he sang it twice more by demand. Rachel pulled Claire aside in the kitchen while Roman was in the living room teaching Maisie the apparently critical skill of stacking plastic cups. "Tell me what I'm seeing," Rachel said. "What are you seeing?" Claire said. "A man who drove 4 hours to sing badly at a 2-year-old's birthday party and looks like this is the best day he's had in years." Claire looked through the kitchen doorway. Roman had been deputized into a cup-stacking project of considerable ambition. He was following Maisie's architectural direction with total seriousness. Maisie was issuing instructions in a combination of words and pointing that Roman appeared to be interpreting correctly. "He's trying," Claire said. "He's doing more than trying," Rachel said. She looked at Claire carefully. "What are you waiting for?" "I don't know that I'm waiting for anything." "You are. You've been waiting to see if it was real. Is that unreasonable?" "No," Rachel said. "It was necessary." But Claire, at some point, waiting becomes a different kind of cage. Claire looked at her sister. Rachel picked up the remainder of the cake and walked back into the living room. Claire stood in the kitchen by herself for a moment. Then she followed. The guests went home in the early evening. Rachel drove to her hotel. Maisie, devastated by the structural collapse of a particularly ambitious cup tower, recovered instantly when the solution turned out to be simply rebuilding it, and then fell asleep in approximately 4 minutes. When Claire put her down, the sudden total unconsciousness of a child who has completely depleted every resource. Claire came back out to the living room. Roman was still there. He had stayed to clean up without being asked the cake plates, the wrapping paper, the cups that had been stacked and restacked across the carpet. He was in the kitchen now, at the sink, running water. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him washing dishes in her kitchen, which was so ordinary it should not have landed the way it did. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." He kept washing. "The cups are sticky. They're always sticky. That's what cups in this apartment are now." He almost smiled, didn't quite. "I don't mind sticky." She crossed the kitchen and picked up a dish towel and stood beside him at the sink and dried what he washed, and they did the dishes together without talking, the water running, the sounds of the apartment settling around them. When the last cup was dried and stacked, Roman turned the water off. They stood side by side at the sink. The kitchen was quiet. "Roman," she said. "Yeah, I have something to say and I need you to just hear it." He turned to face her slightly, not completely sideways, the way you angle toward something you're not sure of. "I am not the same person who left Chicago," she said. "I want you to understand that. I'm not the woman who needed to run. I have built something real here. A career, a home, a version of myself that can handle things I couldn't handle before. I'm not standing in front of you from weakness. I want to be very clear about that." "I know," he said. "I am choosing," she said. "I have been choosing. Every Tuesday, every park day, every time you showed up and I opened the door, that was a choice. I was watching to see if you'd become someone I could trust, and I have watched long enough." He was completely still. "I don't think you're perfect," she said. "I don't think you're done changing. I think there are going to be days when the old instincts are louder than the new ones, and you're going to have to fight them. And some days you'll win that fight, and some days you won't. And I'm going to need you to tell me when you don't, instead of hoping I don't notice." "Okay," he said quietly. "And I'm not promising anything grand. I'm promising that I'm still here, that I'm not leaving, that we can keep doing what we've been doing, except I'm done calling it, just figuring it out in my head, and I'm ready to call it something." "What do you want to call it?" She looked at him. "Starting," she said. "We're starting." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly, slowly enough that she saw it coming, slowly enough to stop it if she wanted to, and he took her hand. Not dramatically, just his hand around hers, the way you hold something you don't want to break. She let him. She looked at their hands. "This is not going backward," she said. "No," he said, "it's not." She looked up at him. "Show me the ordinary Tuesdays," she said. "Every one of them," he said. It was not a fairy tale. That's the part that gets left out of most stories, the part that lives in the years between the moment of starting and whatever comes after. Claire knew that going in, and knowing it made it neither easier nor harder, just more honest. There were good months and bad months. There were Tuesdays when Roman arrived, and something in his posture said Chicago had followed him here, some weight, some residue of the life that was still dismantling itself according to its own complicated timeline. And Claire had to decide in real time whether to address it or give it room, and she didn't always decide correctly. There were months when Claire's own independence felt like something she had to actively defend rather than simply live. When Roman's orbit had enough gravity that she had to work to remember that maintaining her own center was not a betrayal of what they were building. She kept her apartment for a long time. She kept her name on her own accounts. Her career, her friendships such as they were, the small social infrastructure of a woman who had spent 2 years living very close to the bone and had learned to value the few relationships that required nothing from her but to show up. Roman established a place in Columbus, a modest one, by his standards, which Claire had made clear was the only kind she would tolerate, and he came and went between it and Chicago as the transition demanded, and gradually the balance shifted, and gradually Chicago became the place he went from, rather than the place he lived. Margaret stayed on retainer, not because Claire expected to need her, but because Margaret was the kind of practical resource you kept available. Sandra sent a card at Christmas, no return address. Inside it said only, "I hope things are good." Claire wrote back to the email address she had eventually found, and they established a careful, intermittent correspondence that was not exactly friendship, but was something real. On Maisie's 3rd birthday, Roman drove to Columbus, and they went back to the park. Not as a deliberate thing, not as a ritual. It was just that Maisie wanted the park, and the park was where they went. And when they arrived, it was Goodale in May, with the fountain running, and the trees full and green, and Maisie hit the grass at her characteristic pace. She found a maple leaf within 30 seconds. She carried it across the grass with enormous ceremony and presented it to Roman. He took it. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked up at Claire, and Claire looked at him, and neither of them said anything about the first leaf, The November one. The beginning of all of it. But they were both thinking about it. And they both knew they were both thinking about it. And that was its own kind of conversation. Maisie tugged Roman's hand. "Push me," she said, pointing imperiously toward the swings. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He pushed her on the swings. Claire sat on the bench by the fountain, watching. The park was full of the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Saturday. Other children, other parents, pigeons being terrorized, the fountain doing its perpetual work. Nothing about the scene would have looked significant to anyone passing through it. A man pushing a little girl on a swing, a woman watching. The uncomplicated surface of a family afternoon. She was not unaware of how much machinery had churned beneath the surface to produce this particular afternoon. She was not naive about how much work remained. In Roman, in herself, in the complicated dismantling of old habits that were deep-rooted in both of them. She was not pretending that the road behind them had been anything other than what it was. But Maisie was laughing on the swing, that full-body toddler laugh that has no performance in it, no audience, just pure physical joy, and Roman was pushing her with exactly the right force. Having learned through patient repetition what exactly the right force was, and the sun was doing what May sun does in Ohio when it finally commits. Claire put her face up to it. She closed her eyes. She sat like that for a moment, just breathing, and she thought about the woman who had driven out of Chicago at 34 with a suitcase and a secret, and about the years between that night and this afternoon, and about all the things that had required her to hold on to when she had very little left to hold with. She thought about what her sister had said. At some point, waiting becomes a different kind of cage. She had not been waiting anymore, not for months. She had been living in the actual thing, the complicated, imperfect, ongoing actual thing, and the difference between waiting for it to be real and simply being in it was more significant than she had anticipated. "Mama." She opened her eyes. Maisie had abandoned the swing and was running toward her, across the grass, arms out, the full commitment run of a child who has not yet learned to pace herself for the distance. Claire leaned forward and caught her. Maisie landed against her with the force of a small certainty, wrapped her arms around Claire's neck, and pressed her forehead against Claire's cheek. The greeting, the thing she gave the people she had decided to keep. "Hi, Bug," Claire said into her daughter's hair. "Hi," Maisie said. Roman reached the bench a few steps behind and sat down beside them, close enough that his shoulder was against Claire's, and Maisie immediately colonized his lap as an extension of her mother's, and the three of them sat there on the bench by the fountain in the May sun. Maisie already narrating something about a pigeon she had identified as specifically suspicious, and the afternoon went on around them, ordinary and unremarkable and irreplaceable. Roman's thumb moved once across the back of Claire's hand. She didn't move her hand away. Later, years later, there would be a framed object on a wall. In the home, they eventually shared a home in Columbus, because that had never been negotiable, and Roman had never tried to negotiate it. The frame was small and plain, and it hung in the hallway between Maisie's room and the kitchen, at a height that was easy to miss if you weren't looking. Inside it was a dried maple leaf, flat and brown and perfectly preserved, the kind of thing that should have crumbled years ago. Maisie at 6 asked what it was. Roman told her. He told her the whole story, not the complicated parts that she would understand later, but the part that belonged to her, that she had been walking through a park on a cold November morning when she was very small, and she had found a leaf, and she had given it to a stranger who turned out to be her father. "And then what happened?" Maisie said. Roman thought about it. "And then everything changed," he said. Maisie considered this with the focused seriousness she brought to information she was still processing. "Because of the leaf," she said. "Because of you," he said. "The leaf was just how you introduced yourself." Maisie looked at the frame. "I was a good introducer," she said. "You were," he said. He met Claire's eyes over Maisie's head. Claire was in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, her coffee in both hands, watching them. She had spent a long time learning the difference between a man who loves something and a man who loves something, and doesn't try to own it. The leaf was in a frame on the wall, not locked in a safe. Not a file in a drawer. Just there, in the hallway, where anyone could see it, where Maisie could ask about it, where the light hit it differently, depending on the time of day. That was the difference. That was what it finally looked like. Claire drank her coffee. She went back to making dinner.